Isn't that fascinating? The E and the D source are very similar. Lehi and Jeremiah are just like this. And Jeremiah dictated his prophecies to Baruch, and that's probably the source of our book of Deuteronomy. And it all matches the bias of the Book of Mormon authors against Judah and in favor of northern Israel. Every detail comes together beautifully. There are no contradictions here. It is absolutely, no matter what direction we look at. And I'm not done yet. Hang on. Test 8. Did version P, the priestly source, did that exist when Nephi was alive? The version P are the priestly codes and laws. These were not on the brass plates. However, what's this? What documentary hypothesis tells us about the content of the P version? It would be unlikely that Laban, Nephi, or anyone from the kingdom of Israel would have considered it sacred scripture. Second, although a version P is not explicitly mentioned in the Book of Mormon, several verses in the book hint of version P's existence. Friedman credits version P as containing a tremendous body of laws, covering about 30 chapters of Exodus and Numbers and all of the book of Leviticus. Are these laws and codes the type of scripture that the kingdom of Israel prophets would have included on the brass plates? Are they scripture at all? The Book of Mormon contains no body of laws or codes. According to Professor Edward Roos, version P writings were never mentioned by ancient prophets. If they were not mentioned by the prophets, why would these laws and codes have been found on the brass plates? Certainly, documentary hypothesis reasoning implies that authors from the kingdom of Israel would not have placed version P among their sacred records. And the Book of Mormon doesn't do that. That's interesting. The Book of Mormon suggests that a doctrine or a manuscript was circulating, however, at the time of Lehi, that included false teachings. Version P was, according to the documentary hypothesis, an invention of the priests of Judah, created as a rebuttal to versions J and E. Jeremiah was from the E school, and from the ancestry of the kingdom of Israel. And biblical scholars have held that Jeremiah was extremely critical of version P. Friedman explains, he says, Jeremiah knew the priestly laws and the stories. He did not like them, but he knew them. How hostile he was to them can be seen in an extraordinary passage in the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah says to the people, "How do you say we are wise, and Yahweh's Torah is with us? In fact, here it was made for a lie, the lying pen of scribes." Wow! Jeremiah was openly critical of version P. The question is, why? Documentary hypothesis suggests that version P lessened the importance of the prophets and the Torah and boosted the need for centralized worship and priests. Sacrifices and other rites could only be made through a priest and usually only at a temple, while version E emphasized the prophets. Version P, by far the largest of the versions of the books of Moses, only mentioned the prophets once. Indeed, Jeremiah's and Lehi's failed missions of persuading the Jews to reject version P is what possibly led to the end of what scholars call the Great Age of the Prophets. This period ended shortly after Jeremiah's death. One prophet in particular, Joseph of Egypt, seemed to be trivialized by the author of P, the priestly author. Friedman explains, the story of Joseph is about 10 chapters long in both J and E, not just a few sentences as in P. We can explain this partly in recognizing that the person who fashioned the version of P rejected the angels, he rejected the dreams, talking animals, and anthropomorphisms of versions J and E. And so he eliminated most of the Joseph story, which involved 6 dreams in versions J and E. Assuming that the documentary hypothesis version P existed, Lehi certainly would have been side by side with Jeremiah in rejecting that version P. Lehi's own revelations came in the form of a dream, which P rejects, and a central figure in Lehi's teachings was the prophet Joseph, the great patriarch of his family. We can read about that in 2 Nephi 3. So, prophets and prophecies, these were the core beliefs of both Lehi and Nephi. The reason Nephi went to obtain the brass plates is because they could have a record of the prophecies made by the holy prophets. That's 1 Nephi 3, 19 and 20. So Nephi taught that by the Spirit are all things made known unto the prophets, and that the words of the prophets were necessary for salvation. But this is exactly what P rejected. Indeed, the existence of a P document that diminished the role of the prophets is strongly implied in Nephi's text. Writing of his father's mission, Nephi states that when the Jews heard these things, they were angry with him, yea, even as with the prophets of old whom they had cast out. 1 Nephi 1:20. Later Nephi wrote, Jerusalem must be destroyed because of the wickedness of the people, because they have rejected the words of the prophets. 1 Nephi 3, 17 and 18. That includes the words of Jeremiah, as well as his own father. Nephi's not speaking of some past event, but of the rejection of the prophets of his generation in Jerusalem, perhaps those who were following a version of P. For behold, they have rejected the prophets, and Jeremiah have they cast into prison. 1 Nephi 17:14. Very interesting, subtle, interesting consistencies here, with which versions they accept and which versions they reject, and how it connects with Lehi and Jeremiah and Moses and Joseph. Beautiful, beautiful consistency. Well, the 9th test. How could Deuteronomy have been a part of the Book of Mormon?